Good morning. My name's Richard Schramm, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the North Universalist Chapel Society in Woodstock, Vermont on this Sunday, January 24th. This is the North Chapel, where we aspire to be a congregation that nurtures the growth and supports the needs of its members, sustains a strong spiritual life within a loving church community, and seeks to have a positive impact on the world around us. Let me begin with an announcement of special importance. Our annual meeting is next Sunday, January 31st at 1 p.m. The meeting will be conducted by Zoom. A link to the meeting will be available soon. The purpose of the annual meeting is to review the events of the past year and discuss the plan and budget for 2021. It will also be a time to elect new trustees and a new member of the nominating committee. I invite you to check out the church website, northchapelvt.org, for information about a rich array of other events. The theme of our service this month is the common good. In a reflection today, Veronica DeLay shares her thoughts about the common good. Here's a snippet from her thoughtful reflection. An article by the Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University concludes, everywhere, it seems, social commentators are claiming that our most fundamental social problems grow out of a widespread pursuit of individual interests. She continues, I often complain about politics and inequality because I believe that in this country there is enough for everyone. Somehow we have to find a way to change our conversations from me to we. Our common fate, our survival, depends on it. It requires us to sacrifice some of our freedom, some of our personal goals and self-interests. It asks us to look around, open our hearts, and be more inclusive. Here's a poem for our times, Shelter in Place by Kim Stafford. Long before the pandemic, the trees knew how to guard one place with roots and shade. Moss found how to hug a stone for life. Every stream works out how to move in place, staying home even as it flows generously outward, sending bounty far. Now is our time to practice, singing from balconies, sending words of comfort by any courier, hoarding lonesome generosity to shine in all directions like stars. We begin our service today with the hymn, In the Bleak Midwinter.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and I'm speaking to you today from the January woods of Pomfret, Vermont. I have snowshoed into this beautiful spot, and I wanted to read you a poem about new beginnings and thinking of our country making this big turn this week. I'm remembering a time in my own life when I made a rather large decision and when I noticed things changing, and wondered if you all might reflect back in your own life for those times, those moments. So this is called That Snowy Night. The 5-pence coins she fed into the heater of the rented flat, shared with a dour roommate she hardly knew, didn't dispel the wet chill of London's winter. Pulling a chair as close as she could to pore over Aphra Behn, Daniel Defoe, studying the early novel, after she had told him to go, her plan to become a real scholar. In the dusty library, she passed notes through the gated hole, received piles of antique books, bent over papers on scarred wooden tables, names of dead Greek men inscribed in stone above. The ghost of Virginia Woolf spurring her on. Yet her attempts at erudition didn't last. Was it the cold drove her out to the beckoning red booth, swirled by snow, where, feeling very Paddington Bear, she phoned, his warmth drawing her home across the sea? Or some deeper need, as she realized a new life beckoning, another one inside her, just beginning to stir.
Good morning. I'm Veronica DeLay, and I'm doing today's reflection on the subject of the common good. Two simple words, which for me quickly morphed into a tsunami of inquiry. Simply stated, the common good is determined by what is best for everyone. You could say the greatest good for the greatest number. But in reality, when you consider the common good, it's like taking the lid off of Pandora's box. From the time I agreed to do this reflection, I found myself thinking about it a lot, having conversations with others, looking for words to express it. The problem was, there were always more questions than answers, and they kept expanding beyond my reach. I decided to go back to the basics. What does it mean? What does it look like? How do we do it? Is anybody talking about it? I'll share some of my findings with you. The common good is a notion that originated over 2,000 years ago in the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. More recently, it is defined as, quote, certain general conditions that are equally to everyone's advantage, end of quote. The common good includes social systems, institutions, and environments on which we all depend. Public health care, access to education, public safety and security, peace among nations, a just legal and political system, an unpolluted natural environment, and a fair and healthy economic system. It ensures the accessibility to each person of what is needed to lead, quote, a truly human life. Another quote, all citizens must understand that they share the same common fate. In the long run, either all citizens flourish or no one will flourish. End of quote. What are certain general conditions and who decides? How do we define a truly human life? All or none sounds pretty dramatic, but I don't doubt it has validity. Philosophers of the ages have stated that democracy will fail if citizens become more concerned with personal benefits than with the common good. Two simple words that imply a complicated, challenging, and complex philosophical basis upon which to build a democracy. Let's think about it. Common good can only exist collectively. It requires agreement, cooperation, participation, and accountability in a social and cultural context, and it simultaneously respects the individual rights of every citizen. That is massive under any circumstances, and hugely compounded by today's political environment. As Americans, we believe in the power of strength of the individual, and many take great pride in that, to the point where words like socialism or collective become inflammatory. When I think of American individualism, I see the cowboy in the old cigarette commercials, tough and independent, doesn't need anybody. The bootstraps ideology that promotes the belief that everyone is responsible for themselves, and that freedom means I can do whatever I want. How do we reconcile that with the idea of a collective set of principles and shared resources that we can agree upon, live by, and for which we are all held accountable, and that will benefit everyone? It's easy to forget that we don't all have the same opportunities in life or access to the same resources. If you are born into a self-perpetuating subculture of crime, addiction, and abuse, how do you break out of that? Are we willing to tolerate, or worse, look away from the deprivation that exists there? Can we call that a truly human life? A teacher of mine used to say, with freedom comes responsibility. Author Umair Haq wrote an article inspired by his reaction to Americans refusing to wear a mask during a global pandemic. It is titled, How Freedom Became Free-Dumb, D-U-M-B, in America. In making a distinction between freedom, freedom from, and freedom to, he states, America's become obsessed with free-dumb, the idea of freedom as the removal of all restraint, the right to harm others, the ability to do anything you please, no matter how destructive, toxic, foolish, or inane. The right not to ever have to cooperate, to invest, or to act for the commonwealth or common good. The freedom to, on the other hand, is vilified as something that only communists and socialists would want. Why? Because freedom to, say to be educated or to be healthy, requires your input, your help, your cooperation. I like to use a driving analogy as an example of this theory. I'm free to go wherever I want, and I have the right to a driver's license. But I also have a responsibility to know and follow the laws that make driving safe for everyone. It requires agreement and cooperation from all drivers. But what happens if I decide I have the right to do whatever I want and I don't have to follow the rules? Driving at a high speed going north in a southbound lane is not a good idea and will not end well. So we have all agreed to respect the law in order to protect ourselves and others. In the best of situations, we are interdependent, mutually dependent on one another to support each other's emotional and physical needs without demanding or controlling the other. When I lived in an apartment in San Francisco, I hardly knew my neighbors. But when I moved to rural New England and my nearest neighbor was a half-mile away, we got to know each other almost immediately. During those first winter storms, when their car or mine would go off the road or get stuck, we inherently knew that we would help each other. At the same time, we respected each other's privacy. We might never have crossed paths socially or in the larger community, but on the road to home, we knew we could count on each other without ever having to say so. The common good might start right there. Small acts of kindness to help someone in need. The seed that can help us grow into a more inclusive and caring society. Community organizations, places like North Chapel, are built on the grounds of supporting and providing for each other, with the hope that everyone can meet their needs and have a satisfying life. It is a concept that is as equally as important in our small towns as it is in our enormous and varied nation. I often wonder if we don't all know deep down the difference between what is right and what is wrong. That to be human means that we act humanely. If we think about what we consider inhumane, the definition of a truly human life begins to reveal itself. We want to know the answers, but perhaps we aren't asking the right questions, and we need to reconsider. Is it humane to separate children from their parents against their will? Who benefits from these kinds of actions? How can we say that that is in the interest of the common good? The response to the COVID pandemic is an unfortunate example of a missed opportunity to remind us of the importance of good government and the common good. The best scientific research and evidence tells us that COVID is real and that a mask, social distancing, and a vaccine are necessary to stop its spread and to save lives. Therefore, it would be in the interests of the common good that we all agree and act on the suggested precautions to protect ourselves and others. We may not want to believe it, but this is the very best information we have right now. Some would say that it is their individual right to deny and to refuse all of the above. Those who accept it and follow protocol feel their lives are threatened by those who don't. We are now living with the confusion and consequences of an inability to articulate or agree on what is the common good. Even more concerning is our inability to agree on what is truth. An article by the Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University concluded, everywhere it seems, social commentators are claiming that our most fundamental social problems grow out of a widespread pursuit of individual interests. I often complain about politics and inequality because I believe that in this country there is enough for everyone. Somehow we have to find a way to change our conversation from me to we. Our common fate, our survival, depends on it. It requires us to sacrifice some of our freedom, some of our personal goals, and our self-interest. It asks us to look around, put aside assumptions and stereotypes, open our hearts, and be more inclusive. A few years ago, I decided to become a FEMA reservist, which means that when there is a national disaster like a hurricane or fire, people like me have agreed to be ready to deploy in 24 to 48 hours, not knowing for sure where we're going or what we'll find there or not find. The goal is to set up the DRC, the Disaster Relief Center, within 72 hours or less of the disaster. The needs of survivors in their communities are urgent and have to be addressed immediately for recovery to begin. The center has to be accessible to everyone and to meet the many regulations and policies of a public government building. FEMA folks always say, every disaster is different, and it's true. So much preparation and logistics go into anticipating an event, yet there is no hard and firm blueprint. There are always issues specific to a particular place. In a disaster like Puerto Rico or Louisiana, where so much has been destroyed, there might not be a building or structures left for opening a DRC, where survivors can come for help and connect with the many agencies and social services there that provide everything from food and housing to mental health and legal advice. FEMA is an amazing organization of caring, hard-working people committed to helping survivors put their lives back together. There's a lot of bureaucracy and politics that can come into play. It's not perfect. Things change a lot, and it can be challenging. You have to be FEMA flexible. But it is impressive and inspiring and gives me hope. I wanted to do this because I believe personal challenges that take me out of my comfort zone are an opportunity to learn and grow. I also want to try to understand how we've become so divisive. I learn a lot by going to other parts of the country and hearing what other people are thinking and experiencing. For a period of time, maybe a month or 2 or 3, I am submerged in a culture radically different from my life in Vermont. There's the community where the disaster happened, and then there's the DRC community. You would think that showing up for 10 or 12 hours, 6 days a week, would knock you out. But your teammates are all doing the same thing, and we're all there with the same single focus. In the people professions, you have to bring your heart. We are about to meet people who might have lost everything they had. So we keep each other afloat and sometimes form unusual and lasting friendships. Everybody wants to know where everyone is from, and when I respond Vermont, I hear things like, "Oh, Vermont, liberal state. Bernie, you must be a socialist." And to be honest, in places like rural Texas, I make assumptions about them too. I like to think that maybe in the midst of this surreal situation, we can see some decency in each other and discover that we aren't so different. Maybe we can even have a conversation about what's important to us, things from which to build some common ground. There's a familiar story you may have heard. A grandfather is speaking to his grandson about violence and cruelty in the world and how it comes about. The old man explains that it is as if there were two wolves fighting inside his heart, one who is vengeful and angry, and the other who is understanding and kind. The boy listens intently, then asks his grandfather, which of the two wolves will win the fight in his heart? His grandfather answered, the one that wins will be the one that I choose to feed. That story reminds me to recognize the potential for basic human goodness that we all have within us. Sometimes things happen in life, and the angry wolf gets the food and can only see the common bad. It creates a barrier that is hard to cross. But if we can get past that with respect and dignity and try to feed the loving wolf in each of us, there's a chance to reconnect. Maybe if we make goodness more common, we can nourish the common good. In Taking the Leap, Pema Trojan writes, as human beings, we have the potential to disentangle ourselves from old habits and the potential to love and care about each other. We have the capacity to wake up and live consciously. But you may have noticed, we also have a strong inclination to stay asleep. It's as if we are always at a crossroad, continuously choosing which way to go. Moment by moment, we can choose to go toward further clarity and happiness or toward confusion and pain. In other words, which wolf wins? We are in a moment, I believe, of shifts and transformations and reconsideration on a national and global level. There are a lot of uncertainties, but also opportunities. We might be in the midst of one of those rare occasions, often a result of something horrible or disastrous, where going back might be a hindrance to going forward. Some of the practices of our past may no longer serve us well. What will be on the other side of surviving this global pandemic? How can we begin to heal and pick up the pieces? The outcome isn't clear, but there will be one. Can we consider the common good in today's terms, addressing 21st century issues and needs? Can we clearly articulate the value of sharing our wealth and resources for the good of our citizens and the benefit of our survival? It will take truly creative thinking and innovative ideas, compromise and commitment, not only to the common good, but also to the greater good that can sustain us. I'll end as I began with more questions. From Umar Haq. Anyone can be foolish, destructive, selfish, greedy, hostile, cruel. To be fully human, though, is to cultivate the higher values of empathy, grace, truth, beauty, and love. When I have to struggle from food or money or medicine, what room do I have to cultivate those things? I curdle inside and wither. It's only when I have the basics that I can really engage with the higher struggle of being human. How do I love, care, know, emote, empathize, understand, share, grow? Imagine living in a society where freedom means we all have the privilege of asking these kinds of questions. As Amanda Gorman said at this week's inauguration, if you can see it, you can be it. May it be so.
Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Oh, rock me, Lord, come and easy. I got a home on the other side. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Oh, rock me, Lord, come and easy. I got a home on the other side.
Swing low,
Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Oh, rock me, Lord, come and easy.
Come and
I got a
carry
home on
me
the
home.
other side.
Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride.
Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Oh, rock me,
Down, chariot, stop and let
come
me
and
ride.
easy.
My home is on the other side. If you
Swing
get
down,
down,
chariot, stop and
before
let me ride. Swing down, chariot, stop and let me ride. Oh, rock me, Lord, come and easy. I got a home on the other side.
Swing low,
Swing down, chariot, stop and let